On today's show, I want to draw your attention to a very curious, bizarre incident that took place on Sunday in Kilifi. The reason why I want to draw your attention to this particular incident is because I believe it is an early indicator of where we're going, which is not a good place. I believe it is important, indeed critical, for people to be aware of everything, even when all their attention is focused at the moment on only one thing. You know, during a war, you can be so focused on a particular battle and fail to realize other battles emerging that are much more serious than the one you're fighting. And this, I believe, is precisely the situation in this particular case. Anyway, I assure you that will be super interesting. But first, I would like to respond to a concern by some of our subscribers who are asking, what has Magufuli of Tanzania given you, Chris? How can you change so suddenly and become one of his staunchest supporters? Chris, how can you support a madman? Even some of President Magufuli's staunchest long-time supporters are suspicious. One shot message at me and said, "You're the same person who used to criticize President John Pombe Magufuli. You're one of his harshest critics. And now you give us this? No, I don't believe you." Let me respond by telling you a very exciting story. And I believe we're all in total agreement that especially the continent of Africa right now is at war. There is absolutely no other way to describe the situation. During the American Civil War in the 1800s, President Abraham Lincoln was, of course, the commander-in-chief, fighting a very brutal war against rebels in the South who wanted to secede from the United States of America. And promoters of the slave trade, which they relied heavily on to prosper. And of course, you know where most of those slaves came from, the continent of Africa. And the story goes that President Lincoln had a genius of a general, a brilliant military tactician called Ulysses S. Grant. But at one point, he had no option but to fire the general. Why? Because the general was a hopeless alcoholic. If he were a Kenyan, I can hear him saying, "Kwani we don't have other military strategists? Seriously, you can't tell me there's no way we can win this war without this alcoholic." But without General Ulysses S. Grant, things did not go well for the Union Army. They suffered painful defeats. And I can imagine the other generals reassuring the president and telling him, "Don't worry, Mr. President. This next strategy, hao watu watajua hawajui." You know, it is human nature. Very few people will be honest enough to tell you, so and so is better than me at this. This is an emergency. Why don't we call them in? We have very few people anywhere in the world with that kind of integrity. Fortunately, Lincoln was a great leader. You know, unlike what many people on this channel believe, greatness is not created overnight. It's created over a very long time of suffering, hardship, and defeats. In the Bible, how many years did it take for Moses to be prepared to lead the children of Israel out of Egypt? Decades. in the wilderness, looking after herds of animals, and firmly believing he was useless. He was born for nothing, little knowing that his name would go down in history books and would be discussed for thousands of years to date. In the same way, President Lincoln had faced very many defeats. Before he became president, he lost so many elections, many more than Raila Odinga, although Lincoln lost genuinely, that counting his losses at the ballot, even today, is quite a task. Ziko nyingi. Anyway, finally, Abraham Lincoln arrived at his destiny and was elected President of the United States. And his greatness came out very clearly when he made a decisive and very unpopular decision to bring back General Ulysses S. Grant. I can imagine some of his advisors complaining, how are we going to control this guy? He drinks too much. He might get drunk and cause us terrible defeat. Well, we know how this story ended. President Abraham Lincoln won, and it was mainly due to the military genius of General Ulysses S. Grant. And no, he did not give up alcohol. But the man was so brilliant that despite this great weakness he had, which everybody knew, he was still able to fulfill the very important mission of winning the war for the Union Army. My point is, President John Pombe Magufuli of Tanzania is not perfect. He's a human being. His terrible human rights record is well known. People who have tried to question his academic qualifications wamejua hawajui. They have ended up in serious trouble. And President John Pombe Magufuli is human. He's not perfect. But one would be a fool, forgive my strong language, one would be a fool to focus on the weaknesses of a man and completely ignore his great strengths, especially when they're needed so badly in Africa right now. President Donald Trump of the US is not perfect. He has many weaknesses which are well known. He has been very abusive of the continent of Africa. Although I dare add, he has been abusive but accurate in describing Africa. You can insult somebody, and it can be very hurting, but it is the truth. Allow me a quick hilarious aside. I once witnessed two Swahili women quarreling, and one of them said something that made her opponent, the other woman she was quarreling with, just see red. She simply said, angalia lipo hilo. Now this other woman had a giant of a nose. And when I say giant, I'm not exaggerating. It was absolutely true. But this other woman insulted her. And it cut her so deep, she couldn't bear it anymore. And she reacted very violently. But it was the truth. 1000% true. Her nose, yeah. And so in the same way, Trump has said some very nasty things about Africa. Africans have a reason to hate him. But the American president also has some other strengths, which are especially important and extremely critical right now. And currently, this man is almost a lone wolf in a wilderness, surrounded by many other enemies, fighting a battle. And it is extremely important for you and me that he wins that battle. You don't want to think of the consequences if President Trump loses. You don't want to even start imagining. Yeah? And that is why, after over 2 years of people trying to convince me that he was the chosen one, that Almighty God had anointed him and chosen him to be president of the US, finally, I have agreed that that is true. According to me, that's my view. But how long did it take to convince me? A very long time. Now, with President Magufuli, it has taken a very short time. And indeed, many people, observant people, have been able to see very quickly and very clearly why Magufuli is a great African leader, despite his weaknesses. Every man has a weakness. The trick here is to make sure that your strengths overshadow your weaknesses and that you do something that will stand the test of time. And I believe 1000% that that is precisely what this great African, President John Pombe Magufuli, is doing and has been doing for some time. And that is why I have suddenly become one of his staunchest supporters. Now that I've explained myself, let's move very quickly to a place called Rabai in Kilifi County. Now, Kilifi County is a very peaceful county. Crime in the county is very low. It has a much higher population than Kwale, for instance, on the other side of Mombasa, closer to the border with Tanzania. But I myself have been robbed several times in Kwale County. The police are usually very idle in Kwale County. But last Sunday, something happened that is difficult to understand. 2 police officers were on patrol. And just as they were winding up, they arrested a boda who was transporting Mnazi. Mnazi is the local alcoholic brew, very popular. And indeed, very fascinating. Let me just tell you a quick story. I had heard so much about this brew years ago when I used to drink, seriously. And one day, short of funds to drink my usual beer, I decided to try some Mnazi. It was served to me, and I brought it close to my lips to drink. The smell alone almost knocked me out. A terrible smell. Very bad smell. To finish the small cup, I had to shut my nose firmly so that I couldn't smell what I was drinking. True story. Anyway, this policeman arrested a boda rider, a Mr. Harrison Mumuye. And as they were going back to the police station, the Kambe Ribe police station, the police officer called Kelvin Kiragu, Police Constable Kelvin Kiragu, was carrying the exhibit, the evidence, the Mnazi which they had arrested this man with. And then all of a sudden, all hell broke loose. They were attacked by a group of people. And it is said that the suspect who had already been arrested, Harrison Mumuye, joined in beating up the policemen. And the gang escaped, I'm assuming with the Mnazi. Now, this is where this story gets weird, because there are so many contradictions. One version says that Police Constable Kelvin Kiragu was rushed to hospital, where he succumbed from the wounds. Another version, which appeared in only one daily, nobody else has carried this version, says, wait for this one and get ready for it. It's not a very nice thing. The police constable was found later bila kichwa, ama kichwa yake kiwa kando. What? Now I'd fully understand why this version, nobody would want to promote such a version of this story. And I would understand why somebody would want to change the facts and the truth. Yeah, I fully understand, and I'm sure you do. But all versions of this story agree that a weapon, a G3 rifle, was stolen from this slain police officer. It has still not been found. Now, last month in Malindi, which is also within Kilifi County, 2 police officers were attacked by border riders. It was a serious attack. So much so that the Inspector General of the Police Service, Hilary Mutyambai, flew to Kilifi and warned the residents against attacks on policemen. Locals said the reason for the attack was harassment by police officers in the area of people carrying Mnazi, the local brew. Now, it is not too difficult to understand why during these trying times the consumption of Mnazi, which is very cheap, has to go very high. In fact, the consumption of alcohol in the entire country has gone overboard. How do I know this? Last week, we did a very interesting survey here, out of a hunch. We asked all our contacts in various parts of the country to give us a report of how the local wines and spirits shops were doing, comparing to how they were doing before this virus crisis. Now, I don't have figures to support what I'm saying, but everybody reported back that these wines and spirits shops were doing extremely well. Many of them were ordering double and triple what they usually order. But there's another angle, indeed the main angle, that I'd like to focus on in giving you this heads up and this bizarre story and very unfortunate story that unfolded in Kilifi only on Sunday, a few days ago. People's livelihoods have been destroyed completely, by this virus. And so you can imagine that Mnazi is putting food on the table for very many people in Kilifi County. One mtungi ya nazi seized by the police can mean a family or two going without food that day. And if you're a parent, you know something. That of all things in this world that can make you snap, the easiest one is somebody blocking you from putting food on the table for your family. And please don't get me wrong. I'm not promoting the selling of Mnazi. No. What I'm saying is that Kenyans need to pay much closer attention to what people are eating. A much bigger looming crisis for us is not this virus. It is the ability of Kenyans to put food on the table for their families. And I appreciate many will still not see what I'm seeing. Because you live in Nairobi, your fridge is full, you have some money in the bank to keep you going for a few months, your children are eating. Your worry is that they're not going to school. Your worry is their future. How they're going to be able to do exams, if at all. Exams that will have a huge impact on their future lives, on their destinies. But putting food on the table, that's not a problem. And you assume, or you think it is not important to you that majority of the Kenyans should be able to do the same. You assume it has nothing to do with you. You assume you should not even think about it. You assume that it is completely irrelevant to your well-being. Or may I remind you that not too long ago, in a country called Sudan, President al-Bashir the former president, is now behind bars, made a very simple, seemingly insignificant decision. He allowed the price of bread to skyrocket. And I'm sure he was confident. He had a very good intelligence service. He had soldiers on the streets, very well armed. He had tanks, etc., etc. Nothing can happen. I'm sure he told himself. Well, we know different. We know what happened. The minds of enough people in Sudan snapped. So much so that there were not enough soldiers, not enough guns to stop a rebellion that removed a very powerful military leader who had all the guns you can think of from power. But before that happened, just think of the atrocities people went through. In other words, it doesn't matter how much food you have, maybe to keep you going for 1 year. That food in your fridge, that money in the bank will not help you if enough brains in Kenya snap. And hunger is a very dangerous thing. I remember my political lecturer used to tell me many times that Moi will never be removed from power. Why? Because the late President Moi understood very well how to take care of anything and everything that could possibly make the brain of any Kenyan snap. So if there was a famine, he stopped everything and distributed food. If the people didn't have money in their pockets, he harassed the relevant fiscal policy authorities. And he told them, I don't care about inflation. Just get money out there to the people. A very competent African manager, I believe he was a group CEO of a company in those days called East African Industries, Abwana Wanjui, was fired. The multinational was forced to fire him. I understand they were just given a choice. Either fire this man or pack up your operations in Kenya and leave. And what was Bwana Wanjui's crime? He authorized the raising of prices of some basic products of the company, by a few cents, which was a lot of money in those days, but still a very small percentage. And for that, he got the wrath of the late President Moi and had to go. And so, my political lecturer told me at the time, there is no way Moi can be removed by rebellion. It doesn't matter how much money the US pours into Kenya. It won't happen. And his words were very prophetic, because that was the beginning of the fight for multi-party democracy in Kenya. And what unfolded in the next decade and a half proved him absolutely correct. It is good to have a daily briefing of the situation concerning the virus. But let us be brutally honest with ourselves. Assuming that the virus goes berserk, God forbid, but let's just assume it goes berserk and takes away 100,000 lives in Kenya. Still, that will be nothing compared to the disaster we are brewing, the disaster we are watching, while seeds of it are being planted every day, that could unfold on the country called Kenya. 100,000 will be nothing. And that is why the incident in Kilifi has really scared me. I'm an optimist. And while I was doing my research, I was just hoping and praying that this was an attack by Al-Shabaab terrorists. That would be much more acceptable. You know what I mean? But peaceful locals who have changed from being peaceful, law-abiding citizens into brutal, yeah, killers. That one is more than scary. Now, I'm fully aware that many will still not see what I'm saying. They'll not see where I'm coming from. So, Chris, what do you want us to do? Well, glad you asked. In Kenya, we have a very bad habit, of waiting for the government to do everything. Take a closer look at the community surrounding you. How are they doing for food? Go out of your way. Share that food in your fridge. Buy food for the people surrounding you. Yeah. And remember, I know you don't want to believe this, but remember, you're just making yourself more safe. You're not being generous. You're just looking after your own personal security. I kid you not. Until next time, this is Chris Kumekucha.